Welcome back, Logan. Thanks for joining me for another Algebra 1 lesson. What we got going on here is a review from what we did 3 weeks ago. We're going to be taking a look at solving quadratics using the square root. And all this means is we want to get the square by itself and then square root to get rid of that little square, that little number 2 on the top. So for problem number 1, remember, the first thing we want to do is focus on how do we get the square by itself. Now the square in this problem is this guy right here. This is the square of the problem. So we want to figure out how to get that by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the 20 to both sides of the equation, just like this. And the result is going to be 5x to the power of 2 is equal to 20. Now we're still trying to get, 20. We're still trying to get the x squared by itself. So now the next thing I want to do is figure out how to get rid of that 5. So I want the x squared by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides of my equation by 5. This 5 here is going to cancel out, and we're going to get x to the power of 2 is equal to 4. 20 divided by 5 is 4. All right, so now at this stage, what we want to do is now that the square is by itself, right? So the x squared, this thing right here is by itself, the squared component. We want to figure out how to get rid of the square. Now the opposite of a square, the inverse operation, is the square root. So we're going to use the square root on the x squared. Now if we do that to the left side, then we have to do it to the right side. Now this is where it gets tricky. Some teachers condense it, and what they'll do is they'll write both positive and negative simultaneously. Now that's one way to write the problem. One thing that I am going to encourage you guys to do though is to separate the problem out after the square root. So the square root of x squared is just x equals, and then you're going to have the positive of the square root of 4, which is just 2. So our first answer is going to be x equals positive 2, or x equals 2. And then our second answer, the square root of x squared, is just x equals, and then we also have to take the negative version of that answer, which gives us negative 2. So we have two answers here. We have x equals 2 and x equals negative 2. All right, let's take a look at problem number 2. Now problem number 2, very similar idea here, except the square component is already by itself. There's not a whole lot we have to do. So this thing right here is what we want by itself because that's the square component. So now that it's by itself, all we need to do is get rid of it. Now in the last problem, when we wanted to get rid of the square, we used the square root. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to take the square root of the left side and take the square root of the right side. But remember, when you take the square root of both sides of the equation, you're going to want to keep both the plus and minus in there. So you can write it as that, or like I've been encouraging you, I want you guys to separate this thing out. This gives us two answers. Now when you take the square root of a square, the square and the square cancel, and we get x minus 7 is equal to positive, we're going to take the positive version first, positive 6. So if you want to write plus 6, positive 6, you can. But then there's a second variant on this problem. We have x minus 7 equals, and then the negative version, negative 6. And now we want to solve each of these independently. Now these are two separate problems. So on the first one, we're going to add 7 to both sides. So I'm going to add 7, and the result is going to be x equals 6 and 7 adds up to 13. I'm going to do the same thing with the other problem, except it's its own. So I'm going to isolate the x, adding 7 to both sides, and we get x equals negative 6 plus 7, which is just 1. So my answer for the second problem is both 13 and 1. All right, go ahead and take a look at the problems. Try as best you can. If you don't understand it, take a look at the previous video, and hopefully I can help you out. Otherwise, hit me up by email or Google Classroom, and I'll get to you back as soon as I can. Hope you guys are keeping it safe. Talk to you later.